And we're live. It is Tuesday, April 28th, 2020, 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. The Guardian reports that 10 Downing Street is unable to say if Boris Johnson will face Keir Starmer at Prime Minister's Questions this week. Kim Jong-un is still at a undetermined level of deadness. We're not allowed to have fun anymore, but in lieu of fun, we have Preet Bharara. And for those of you who don't know this, whenever Preet and I get together, the conversation is principally about adoption. So Preet.
Yes, sir.
Let's talk adoption.
How are you? All right. What do you want to,
adoption of children, adoption of like other states' laws, adoption of like what are we talking?
So adoption.
I think there's a moratorium on adoptions at this moment, right?
Yeah,
well, to adopt and you stay at home.
You can't go within 6 feet of your adopted child. Welcome to In Lieu of Fun, Preet. What are you doing?
Well, thanks for having me. This is it's a new thing for me. I dressed up.
What are you doing these days in lieu of fun?
I'm doing a bit of this. Cheers.
So are we all cheers?
I'm watching a lot of television. I'll say for the first couple of weeks, everyone's still stressed and there's still a lot of anxiety, and we've known people who have had a lot of issues, and we care about and worried about our older members of the family. But at some point after about 3 or 4 weeks, you start to realize you have a little bit extra time in your hands. What shows should we watch? And so different members of the family are watching different things. Nice background. I have chosen not to watch The Tiger King.
Oh, that's a bad decision.
I've chosen not.
I want to hear your reasons why.
My kids are watching. It's first of all, everyone's watching it, which sometimes is a reason not to watch something. If the whole damn world is watching something, maybe I'll come back to it. It has not gotten.
Do you
the most
do this
positive...
with Titanic too?
I watched that eventually. Back in the old days. It has not gotten a great review from my older son. It starts off kind of with a bang, but I'll tell you what I did watch that was recommended to me that I'm amazed I hadn't seen before. 3 seasons of Ozark.
Oh yeah, Ozark is amazing.
I just started watching this because Ben can't shut up about it. Do you also recommend it? I
do very much.
You think that it's not so great after the first 2 episodes? I'm like not super into it yet. Do I need to keep going?
It's not for everyone. And I'll tell you something. I don't want to give anything away. First of all, Jason Bateman is incredible. And Laura Linney is also incredible, maybe even slightly more incredible. And when you have characters like those over the course, fun thing to talk about, over the course of seasons, they're not static characters. They change a lot.
Yeah, they get worse and worse and worse.
It's kind of like a version of Breaking Bad. There's a bunch of, I've noticed there's always this character in these shows, whether it's Breaking Bad or The Sopranos or Ray Donovan or Ozark. I don't know if you watched any of those shows, but in all those shows, there's a lot of violence and there's a lot of sort of organized crime activity. And there's always the teenage daughter who has her own storyline and issues with her dad. And I wonder if it's like a required feature according to some formula that showrunners have, that you have to have that sort of weird relationship between the dad, who's usually kind of a good guy, but also kind of a very bad guy, and the teenage daughter who gets into bad relationships.
So I have a question about,
interesting.
Ozark cured me of any instinct I ever may have entertained to have a secret money laundering operation. One of the things that's interesting about it is how unglamorously it portrays the life, and there's the whole show is a portrait of these people who would clearly rather be doing something else, but have been some combination of trapped in it and become addicted to it, or trapped in it and fear for their lives if they try to extricate themselves, or some combination of it. I'm curious, Preet, when you have dealt with white collar criminals, of which you've done a lot, how many of them have you found that a reasonable description of? They're basically normal people who got in way over their heads and can't get out of something. Maybe they're not even trying because they're past the point where they can even think about getting out, but they're basically you or me with a different, like a different fork in the road, sometime much lower down in the tree. And how many, like what percentage of them are just like different, you know, characterologically different, like, you know, really like they're criminals in their core.
So I think it runs the gamut. And I don't know what the percentages are and how you would allocate them, but there were certainly people, and I represented a couple of people like this when I was in private practice before I went to the U.S. Attorney's Office, where you have a guy who's basically a good person, and you know they're under a lot of pressure. I remember once we represented the CFO of a company, young guy, young kid, not married for too long, and he needed to meet the numbers for that quarter. And this is, 20 years ago. And, one quarter, he decided to fudge the numbers. He cooked the books a little bit, didn't get any personal gain from it. Did it, he thought, one time because the business was going to pick back up, nobody would ever be the wiser. And that's what he did. The problem is that's often the first step down, towards the descent to hell. The next quarter, things are not better. The quarter after that, things are not better. And as you know, if you've ever done any criminal work or you've read sagas or watched sagas about crime, the first time you do something like that is tough, right? Whether you're a hitman or you're a fraudster, it becomes a little easier every quarter. And before long, he was engaging in very substantial fraud. And then after that, we learned later, was actually engaging in self-dealing and embezzling from the place. Very contrite. He ended up pleading guilty in one jurisdiction. He's in the category of person that I think you're describing, as somebody who didn't start out to be a criminal, didn't have a criminal heart, got in a bit of a bind, couldn't get his way out, didn't cut his losses, and continued to do that kind of thing. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have people like Bernie Madoff, who my office prosecuted, who was clearly a sociopath in a particular way, made up every single trade.
You don't think that started with like the same type of like, I'm just going to do this one thing time?
It maybe, but then he made a dramatic leap into a multi, tens of billions of dollars in fraud, complete and utter baloney, while presenting himself to be something different. I remember the judge at his sentencing, Denny Chin, used a word that you don't ordinarily see with respect to white collar criminals. He called them evil. And there's some people who are like that and do it without batting an eye and don't care about anybody and have black hearts. But then there are other people who, as you describe, are reasonably good people and they made a mistake which they couldn't get, they couldn't claw back. And then there are people who just make, the one mistake, to do the one thing the one time, but they're caught for that, and that still ends up being a crime. So I think it's the whole range.
I love talking about talking about TV. I mean, you mentioned The Sopranos, and then my other favorite show, I love The Sopranos. I actually took 2 classes on The Sopranos in college because I went to Brown and we don't teach real things there. But there
were 2 of education.
The curriculum had 2 classes on The Sopranos.
Yeah, it was the Modern Culture and Media department, and it was all the one I took was we compared it to George Eliot's Middlemarch, which is actually quite excellent. Right. So, anyways, but The Sopranos, you've got this kind of anti-hero, and I think that there's there is no better anti-hero almost in modern TV than like Tony Soprano until you get to kind of The Wire. And that's kind of, I think, this even more fascinating, like both of them are cultures that are people that are like born into a culture of crime. And so you just described like people normalizing themselves to a culture of crime. But like, if that isn't even a question, if you're born into it, like if there's not even like a moment.
Absolutely. Like if you're born, you can be literally born into an organized crime family and you take over the family business. Like you might become a mortician because your father was. That happens all the time.
Yeah, or drug running, or like whatever it is. And so this is actually, so you brought up the thing about the younger daughter who's like questioning what their father is doing. I always thought that the reason that they had that was it was like the perfect Pollyanna in order to break out of that, right? Like that perfect person to kind of be like, maybe this is not the culture for me. Maybe this is like a culture that is bad and questions the normalcy, right? I don't know. Right. That's kind of how I saw it.
Did you watch Breaking Bad?
Yes.
Because that's another sort of, I don't know how you
No, totally.
place that in the pantheon. How many classes did you take on Breaking Bad?
It wasn't. I'm not that young. So like, there was no Breaking Bad. I had to stop watching Breaking Bad after the plane episode because I just I basically started just having like heart attacks. It was just a very stressful show. But yeah.
I mean, what makes these shows also is the act. I mean, Bryan Cranston is one of the greatest actors alive today.
So good.
It's unbelievable.
So good.
So I want to test your nerddom, Preet.
Oh no.
Did you listen to?
Do we have a drinking game going?
The DC Circuit's argument
we can do it
again today.
Wait, you're going right for the core questions.
I did not. Can we stay? Can we do some more TV?
Well, It was TV. It was on YouTube.
I did not see it. How was it? How did it go?
Oh, I think the en banc DC Circuit will almost certainly reverse the panel and give.
Who is the panel?
The panel. So this is the House's subpoena to Don McGahn after the Mueller report, and McGahn refused to show up, and the Justice Department has claimed on his behalf that he has a categorical immunity from a subpoena by Congress, despite having spoken to Mueller and that material having been turned over to Congress. And the panel ruled that this question was non-justiciable. And over a dissent from Judith Rogers, and this was en banc along with a challenge to the president's reallocation of funds for the border wall, which was also challenged by a House suit. So the consolidated case raises the question of whether the House can resort to litigation as opposed to political tactics to confront what it regards, and for that matter, I regard, as administration lawlessness. Yeah, I mean, I thought it was like the DC Circuit at its best, to be honest. You know, you sort of regretted Merrick Garland not being on the Supreme Court, and you kind of regretted Patty Millett and David Tatel not being on the Supreme Court as well. But I was curious whether in your drinking and watching TV that included watching YouTube live of the DC Circuit.
Not today. And do you feel were the parties and the lawyers acting supremely differently because they knew this was going to be on YouTube? Because that's the argument that people have been making, I think, not well for years and years as to why we can't have real-time video transmission of
so
Supreme
this
Court
was not
arguments.
Video, it was audio.
It's only audio.
And
I thought there was some okay.
But I have a pretty good controlled experiment in this, because I have been in the DC Circuit probably 30 times when Doug Leder has been arguing cases, because I, covered all of the Guantanamo litigations that he supervised. And so I know what a Doug Leder argument looks like. And this was no different on that side. The Justice Department argument was excellent. It was very well. I mean, the substance of the argument is extravagant, but it was made well and expertly and professionally. And I don't think, I mean, it's definitely different from what it would have been in person, but that was because they organized it differently so that judges wouldn't talk on top of each other. So they did it more like a congressional committee. Each judge got a certain amount of time to ask questions, and then they circled back. But that was a function of doing it by conference call, not a function of live streaming it. So I thought it was super great, actually. It was really long. It was like 2.5, 3 hours.
I mean, that's the other thing I was going to say. En banc is always long, but if you're going to do a goddamn every single person asks a question, that's never, like, I don't know about the DC circuit, but Second Circuit was never like that. Like it was like there would always be like I don't know. I think about half would ask questions. I don't know. That was
No,
I mean, I guess it would depend, but
And do you think when
the DC Circuit, some of them were more active questioners than others.
Okay.
I thought you definitely walked away from the argument with a very rich sense of the case, even if you hadn't read the briefs.
do you think that when things go back to normal, whatever that means, with respect to the court, Supreme Court and circuit courts, that there might be more of a move to have real-time audio of these arguments?
So I think the DC Circuit always real times its audio now. It's really.
So what do you think will happen in the Supremes then?
I mean, the Supreme Court is hopeless on this, and the reason, as best as I can tell, is that nobody can force them to, and so as long as one of them has a real objection to it, they're going to respect that real objection. And I mean, they're so finicky about other things in a way that no other court would be. The reporters have assigned seats, and there's the whole thing is sort of grotesquely status driven,
Yeah.
I don't know why they organize it that way, except that they can. But I will say that, arguments at the DC Circuit, in my experience, are consistently at a higher level of preparation than arguments at the Supreme Court. The audio streams are available same day, if not live. And
there's not the same opportunity that you would have at a trial or a pretrial hearing where there are witnesses to engage in histrionics and engage in drama. They're usually dry legal arguments, and you're trying to win. And the people you need to win over are not the people who are listening or watching on YouTube, but the folks who are in front of you in robes, right?
And they're repeat players, in a way that is just not true. In a trial court, there are there are a lot of repeat players, but at the DC Circuit, an immense percentage of the cases, one side of them is the civil appellate staff at the Justice Department, right? And the percentage of cases that have the same 20 people arguing is very, very high. And so the idea that those people are going to regard the cameras as their constituency rather than regard the judges as their constituency seems to me very silly. But
can I make can I make one observation?
Please.
That is sort of adjacent to this that I've been thinking about recently in this debate. So for 4.5 years, I worked in the Senate. I was chief counsel to Senator Schumer on the Judiciary Committee. And every Congress, he and our inspector would introduce the cameras in the courtroom bill. And there are various versions of the bill and various amendments that would be entered and offered so that it would be more palatable to some senators, less palatable to others, whether you should have cameras in district courts, cameras in the circuit courts, cameras in the Supreme Court. And what I noticed about that, the debates about those bills in the markup, different from some other kinds of things that people argued about, where you could predict based on party and based on ideology, it would come out this way or that way. With respect to cameras in the courtroom, my observation was this. You couldn't tell if a Republican or a Democrat would vote one way or the other. It was basically a little bit correlated with whether or not, as a senator, you were generally comfortable in front of a camera. If you as a senator believed, I'm the same in front of a camera as I am in my office, as I am with my constituents, the camera doesn't distort anything that I do because I'm very comfortable with it. One of those people, you'd be not surprised to hear, Senator Schumer. The other one, Arlen Specter. Some of the senators who were not so drawn to a camera had the view, I think it was a matter of etiquette and aesthetics, not so much law, like Dianne Feinstein, a little less interested in the idea of having cameras in the courtroom, and were more prepared to believe the arguments on the part of members of the court and the bar that it would have a distorting effect. I don't know if that's interesting or not, but that's how people thought about it.
I think for some, look, and the extreme other side of that, was Justice Souter, who is a genuinely introverted and shy person, and I think whose vision of hell might include somebody pointing a camera at him. And and so I think, I think there are, like, personal sensibilities are a big factor in this.
So I want to kind of follow up two things. Preet, am I right that you clerked for Jack Weinstein? Am I misremembering?
That's incorrect.
Oh, damn it.
Some other person.
Oh, okay. I thought that I had looked up something. I think it was actually someone who came on before. But anyways, I wanted to kind of point out Dave Posen, who is a professor at Columbia Law School, and does a lot of great First Amendment stuff, did a wonderful quantitative study of basically the number of times Congress people mentioned on the floor the First Amendment and invoked the First Amendment for their party. And there is this tremendous moment, and I think it's like 1981 or 1983, whenever it is, a C-SPAN starts kind of live streaming
Right.
Right. That all of a sudden there's this spike in the righteousness of the First Amendment in favor of whatever it is that they're arguing, and they're claiming it for their own partisan kind of politics. And I think that's actually kind of very much to your point, Preet, which is just kind of there are some people who don't change, and then there's some people that do, and that also it's a different type of thing if you're running for Senate every 6 years, every 2 years, or whether you're a lifetime appointed judge or a political appointment in front of for the state or whatever else. And I think that those are kind of all interesting questions. Yeah, I think that it's a very different. So while I was clerking on the Second Circuit, we had a few arguments in which people couldn't make the arguments, some judges, and they teleconferenced in. And I would say that it was not the best stand-in.
Right.
And that could have been at the time. But also,
it's kind of like, this is not a good stand-in for an actual happy hour.
No, exactly. But it's, hey, thanks a lot, Preet.
We don't call it.
No, I would like to see you folks in person. It would be much nicer to see you in person. Even though in person, Rhea Perlman wouldn't be behind you.
I know. God, such good hair. And then I feel
there was no pandemic back then. Much easier.
I know, it's so true. I have nothing. I have basically bobby pins and sweat. I just
can I ask you a related question? So for me, separate. I mean, I have my own sort of issue on cameras in the courtroom. The parallel of that for me is we have producers and members of my team who always want to have cameras in the podcast, which I hate. I don't like them. I'm against them. I don't know if that makes me constitutionally conservative or not.
Why are you opposed to them? Just because you actually?
It's another thing. It's another thing to worry about. I'm focused on.
But you also record, at least in the time when I did your podcast, you recorded a lot more sound than you used, right? I mean, you're actually.
Yeah, we do a lot of it. We do a bunch of editing because we go pretty long and then we edit it some, and they take out all the stupid stuff that I say. God bless them. But if there's a camera too, then you got to worry about how you're looking.
I completely agree with that.
I can't.
I think it's distracting. I think, but and the reason that I was hoping that you'd clerked for Weinstein was because Weinstein. I don't know how familiar. I also clerked in the EDNY, not for Weinstein.
I believe for Eric Vitaliano.
Yes. Oh yeah.
Oh I see. My research was pretty good there.
Okay. Yeah.
Better than Kate's apparently.
Better than mine apparently.
Well, I know Eric Vitaliano. Because he became a judge at the time that I was working on the Senate Judiciary Committee, and he was recommended to the President of the United States under a deal, even though he was a Republican president, by Chuck Schumer.
Oh yeah, I do remember that.
Who was very excited to recommend a great lawyer, and I believe he was a state court judge at the time.
He was a state court judge, but he had been in the legislature for 25 years.
Oh right, yeah, and somebody who was pragmatic, who was from an Italian from Staten Island, who had never been on the Eastern District bench before.
I love both my judges. They were both the most wonderful. It was just a gift to learn under them, and I just have such respect for them. Eric was Judge V is the best.
Judge V. It's funny. This is why I realized how young you must be, because I'd already been in private practice, already been an assistant U.S. attorney, and I was working in the Senate. And help prepare the senator's questions for the hearing where Eric Vitaliano got not very much grilled. He was a pretty non-controversial nominee, but where he got questioned.
It's actually, he's an incredible story because he had been in the state legislature for like 25 years, not practicing as attorney, not doing anything, specifically not being in federal court. And you will never, and he was pretty much completely, and I think he is pretty much totally blind now, like physically blind.
Oh,
He had
I
really
did not
bad
know
eyesight.
that.
He has glaucoma and it's really bad, but he's senior now. And you will never meet a man who did not work in the federal like rules of civil procedure and understands them better. Like he just is like, he had this, it was amazing. He just really like, it was very, 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 it was very interesting to work for him. And he was very patient and low key and wonderful. And he was a great judge. So yeah.
All right.
Sorry.
So if you've got a question for Preet, frame it in the form of a question in the Q&A so that we know you're not a Zoom bomber. And we will rapture you in so that you can ask your question. We got to start with Maggie Feldman-Pilch because she has an awesome question and because she's Maggie, who's the only person who's ever sung an aria on In Lieu of Fun. Maggie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ben. And hi, Preet. We met once when I was like a very small child. So you
Very
would
small
have no way of
child.
knowing that. Yeah, because I'm from the beautiful state of New Jersey, and it was like a weird context that I barely remember. But I don't know, when you got famous, my dad was like, "Do you remember meeting him when you were like 7?" And I'm like, "Sure, Dad. Okay."
Do I know your dad?
Do you know Herb Stern?
I feel like maybe
everybody knows somebody named Herb Stern.
That's fair.
I know 6 guys named Herb Stern.
Yeah, ask your question,
he was a
Maggie.
federal judge. But anyways, my question is, if you had to replace your wedding vows with any Bruce Springsteen lyrics, what would they be?
Oh, so I'm very bad at these kinds of questions on the spot like this. Probably I think any lyric from Thunder Road, anything about casing the promised land, I think would work. That may not be sufficiently romantic, so don't tell my wife I said that. But I think everyone in my family appreciates that for me the best song ever written is Thunder Road.
Serious question though. How much of your Bruce Springsteen adoration is because it's like become part of your persona, and like, you have this whole kind of Preet origin story, worked for
I have
Schumer,
no hobbies. I have no hobbies.
Like got fired by Trump, ran the SDNY, loves Bruce Springsteen, podcaster. How much of it is that? And like, is Bruce Springsteen what you listen to when you're by yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I listen to the Sirius XM Springsteen station most of the time when I'm in a car, which is not a lot. This, by the way, I'm in my workspace in the basement of my home, and what is over my right shoulder is, as I was telling you before we went live, 1984 picture of Bruce. I'm very into Bruce, and obviously, when I became a little bit better known, and it came to Bruce's attention that I was a fan, it escalated. And I've met Bruce backstage. He gave me, can I brag about the best thing that ever happened to me?
Yeah, of course.
Outside of the birth of my kids and maybe becoming U.S. attorney was.
Please note you did not mention your wedding vows.
And my wedding vow, and that also, we already covered that. In 2012, I went to a concert in Connecticut where Bruce told someone, a mutual friend, that if Preet and his family come, I'll meet him backstage. I literally got a shout out from him from the stage.
That's exciting.
And since then, in the same way that you and I think began as Twitter friends, I've become Twitter friends with Nils Lofgren and Steven Van Zandt. And so, I'm not just a sort of a distant fan. I get to interact with these folks from time to time. I saw Bruce Springsteen's Broadway show 3 times. By the way, one of the worst things about all this, and I
Was
don't mean
it
to
great?
complain. Amazing. I mean, amazing. I went once with my wife, once with my son, and once with one of my best friends. And each time was incredible. Got to go backstage and talk to him and Patty. So my love for Bruce is genuine and deep and real and expensive, although less expensive now, because look, there are a lot of terrible things about home confinement that we're all subjected to at this moment. and I feel blessed that my family is for the most part well and good. But boy, do I miss the opportunity to go see a show. I miss the opportunity to go, to the movies. We've been watching a lot of movies at home.
Well, you brought Mike Birbiglia to you.
We did. We did on the podcast.
Oh my God. How'd you do that? I love Mike Birbiglia.
You know what? I felt in the first few weeks of this, my father-in-law passed, not from the COVID virus. And it was a very difficult time. There was a lot of sadness everywhere in my house, and none of us could go and be with him at the end, which is the sad part. And, I'm friendly with Mike just from other things. And, I thought someone said to me, I wrote about this recently, Andy Slavitt, who's been talking a lot about the coronavirus, said something very important, which is very obvious, but I think we don't take to heart. And that is, and I think we're doing some of this here, it's still okay to laugh. Right. And in the midst of death and tragedy and the economy imploding and people aren't able to hug each other anymore and see your friends, you kind of need some laughter. And Mike came on and he did an hour of funny stuff. And, I'll tell you, not everyone thought that was appropriate in the middle of this. I disagree with them. We talked about some of these, shows we're watching. The other thing that I started doing, a few weeks ago is when the president began his White House briefings, I began turning them off, catching up on the news later, and instead watching an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm. I think
it is not an accident when you ask about the timing of In Lieu of Fun that it overlaps with the timing of the president's briefing. When we were thinking of
right.
But
he's always late.
What would be, we can't control his timing, but what's like a good thing to be doing when the president gives that briefing? How about something else?
Right. That involves a cocktail.
Exactly. All right, Andrew Ross, the floor is yours. Hashtag Ask Preet.
Thank you. Enjoying this very much. I was a little frustrated with what I thought was the lack of aggressiveness by the House Democrats when they took over and immediately got stonewalled on subpoena after subpoena and other requests to the administration. And I was wondering what you would think, whether they could have and should have done some sort of an emergency petition in federal court earlier on, pointing out, how timeliness was important for the court to hear it on an emergency basis, and perhaps to bundle, 3 or 4 of the most outstanding and critical issues, even though they weren't technically related, into some sort of omnibus petition to lay out for the court and for the public that this isn't just one case or another. This is an entire policy decision by the administration, and we think it's unconstitutional. I was wondering what you would think if they had chosen a route like that.
Great question.
Yeah.
What do you think, Preet?
I don't know. And I'm curious to know what you guys think. Look, the bottom line, both for Bob Mueller and for the House Democrats, was there was a political clock. Or maybe it was less fixed for Bob Mueller and more discretionary for Bob Mueller, who's not a politician. But certainly for the House Democrats, this impeachment inquiry began not until September of last year. And whether you like it or not, and there are differences of opinion about this, Adam Schiff understood we're going to go or we're not going to go. And if we're going to go, given how long it takes to conduct an inquiry, take the depositions, have live testimony, draft articles of impeachment, vote on the articles of impeachment, send them to the Senate, have an actual trial. They did it really, really fast as possible. And it still didn't get done until sort of the end of January, beginning of February. And I think there was always a concern that if you went the route of going to the mattresses, and I appreciate that you're talking about some other possibilities like using an omnibus, it's a bit of a crapshoot. Maybe some of these things could be decided more quickly than others. But I think you put that against the possibility of those fights dragging out till late spring. I mean, in this environment, imagine what would have been like if in the middle of the coronavirus, all that would have gone away, I think. But in the absence of that, you're now putting yourself towards the end of spring, maybe the beginning of summer. I think that for Nancy Pelosi and Adam Schiff and others, they either wanted to do it or not do it with whatever they had, whatever evidence they were able to get, whatever testimony they were able to get, earlier in the season than might have been possible had they pursued all those options in court. I don't know if you guys have a different view. I was somewhat critical. I thought they maybe should have pressed more, but I certainly understand why they went the direction they went.
I basically agree with that. I would add a couple of minor points. First of all, I do think that there isn't a whole lot of difference between there are three big cases you're going to have to litigate, and I don't see a way to consolidate them. So one is whether this absolute testimonial immunity exists or not. This is a big deal, and this DC Circuit case that was argued today is the test case for that. If the president wins on this, nobody has to show up. That's a really big deal. The second is, how robust is executive privilege if they have to show up? And the third is this issue that is currently at the Supreme Court in the Mazars and other cases, which is, does the executive branch get to decide whether Congress has a legitimate basis for a legitimate investigative basis for issuing the subpoena in the first place? Now, I don't see a way to consolidate those questions. And so I think they do end up having to be litigated separately. So you're going to have three cases at a minimum before you can flood the world with subpoenas and expect that they're going to be responded to in a timely fashion. And I think once you realize that, once you accept that, it doesn't matter that much if those cases are consolidated or if there is one that represents the class. If Don McGahn has to show up, a whole lot of other people have to show up, and they will not relitigate the question that McGahn has litigated once there is a stable precedent on point. So I don't know that there's an alternative to this, except the alternative that every past administration and every past Congress have done, which is to reach accommodations and not litigate the questions. But Trump is being extremely aggressive. And under those circumstances, you actually do have to litigate these questions, and litigation does take time. The second point I would make is that, normally in a situation like this, the House is very outgunned as a litigation matter because the executive branch has the entire Justice Department, and the president, on a personal level, if you think about Bill Clinton's defense, he had Williams and Connolly at his disposal, which is a brutally effective Washington firm. That is not really the case right now. The Justice Department is still the Justice Department, but the House is represented by an extraordinarily able collection of lawyers, most of whom used to be civil appellate lawyers at the Justice Department or senior lawyers at the Justice Department. And so there really is a litigation capacity at the House. And the president's personal lawyers have been, ranged from the modestly competent to the catastrophic and disastrous. And so I do think there's an opportunity to make some law here. It's just going to take a little time. And then the final point is there's a huge variable in this, which is nobody really knows where the Supreme Court is. Nobody knows. People assume that there's a 5-4-ish kind of lilt in favor of executive power, but that does not answer the question how the court would resolve any particular case, particularly the more extravagant of the president's claims. For example, like there's absolute immunity from subpoena for certain White House officials. And so I think there are actually a lot of variables in play, and it's probably not reasonable to expect Nancy Pelosi and Adam Schiff, who, remember, are the clients here, to have devised a litigation strategy that was going to bury the executive branch by now.
Can I ask a question of you guys? Which seems, sure. I asked this of a guest recently, Kate, which seems longer ago, the Trump impeachment or the Clinton impeachment?
Oh, God. Actually, that's a great fucking question.
Yeah, it's not a question that has an answer though.
Yeah,
because they're
I mean,
in different
Right. It's
times.
like we're in a time warp now when I don't know what the answer to that is.
And when I like followed the Clinton impeachment, I purposefully ignored the Trump impeachment. I just thought that it was all a joke. Not because I didn't agree that he had done something, but because I knew there was never going to be any type of like end game that I cared about that was going to end up. And it was just going to be like it's kind of like watching a J.J. Abrams movie or an J.J. Abrams like TV show. It was like, I just know that the black box is like bullshit, and I like it's never going to give me the payoff that I want it to, and so like I don't engage. But yeah, I don't know, Ben, what do you think?
The Trump impeachment feels really recent to me. I had I wrote all of the Washington Post editorials during the Clinton impeachment, and that feels like a lifetime ago to me. And the Trump from the campaign to the Comey firing period to the Mueller investigation to the Ukraine stuff to the impeachment to the coronavirus feels like a continuous wave that has crashed over me in a and that I am only because of home confinement and the sort of forced stillness of the current moment taking a breath from. So that actually feels really recent to me. And I kind of, one part of my brain knows exactly what you mean by the question. And the other part of the brain says, wait, Trump impeachment's over? Like yesterday? So it feels really.
Preet, what's your answer?
Man, it's like a lot of things, right? Some things feel like they were a million years ago. And at the same time, they feel like they were 3 minutes ago.
Yeah.
And that's how, I just feel like something about this pandemic has wiped out a lot of things. It's reoriented everyone. It's caused people to have different priorities. People, I don't know if you saw that funny meme, showing the guy who's with his girlfriend and he turns back and he looks at some other person.
That's like a really old meme. That's
various versions of that. But the one that I liked most recently that was relevant and maybe self-indulgent was it showed the guy next to his girlfriend and the girlfriend was a former federal prosecutor.
Yeah, I think you saw that in a tweet from me.
Right? Yeah, it was you?
That was me.
A bunch of people tweeted it, and he's turned around, and the new shiny object is doctors or infectious disease experts. There's almost no room to think about other stuff. We do it, and you have podcasts, and you write, and I do too. But it just seems like I've never seen an event. Even 9/11 for some time was like this, and I would have to go back and check. But the all-consuming nature, not just for people who write about health. If you're in journalism, this is the main story. If you write about health, if you write about science, if you write about politics, if you write about sports, there's no field in which this is not the most important story. And that has an effect of sort of blotting out for a lot of people what came immediately before.
You want to have you in the spirit of blotting out what came before, you want to have your mind blown. The summer 2001, the summer of 2001, the big political story, the scandal that was like consuming Washington for the summer, that was obliterated by 9/11, involved what?
I remember it's something very frivolous and silly because I've heard people make the point before, but I cannot remember it as I speak.
I have two words for you, Preet. Chandra Levy.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
well, that was a serious thing.
It was a serious thing.
So I take that back. It was not frivolous.
So this was.
I take it back. It was not frivolous.
It was not frivolous, but it was like none of us have thought about this issue again.
Well, that answered the trolley problem for us right there.
All right. Speaking of the coronavirus, Catherine Nyhus has a question about a question that links the world of the deep state and the world of the coronavirus. The floor is yours, Catherine.
Hi, from Los Angeles.
Hello.
Preet, I'm a cafe insider, Preet. So
Nice, good for you.
thank you. So here's my question. The Washington Post today has an article saying that for months, Trump was warned in the presidential daily brief about the virus and that it was dangerous. And the media is making it sound like, holy shit, this is a huge, revelation. And my first reaction was he ignores all new information. He was warned by other people like Alex Azar. So how is this different? But the media makes it sound like this is substantively a different situation and that there could be repercussions. So I'd be curious to know what you all think.
Yeah, I don't know that it's so different. I think it's just another data point, another series of bits of evidence that show the opposite of what Donald Trump presents himself as, that time and time again in different ways, and now through the PDBs, he was advised, he was told, he was warned. Lots of experts in the government were screeching at the top of their lungs internally about how bad this would be. And you juxtapose those warnings with the kinds of things he was saying back at the time, like it's 15, it's going to go to 0, it's going to disappear, all those various things, all of which add up to, I think, a very impressive indictment, not a formal indictment, but a very impressive indictment of his leadership, and lay at his feet a lot of responsibility for all these things, even though he has said literally in response to questions about whether or not he should have any responsibility, no, I have no responsibility at all. I don't know whether it matters to various people. I mean, some people ask the question, is there a lawsuit that could be brought against the president? I don't believe so. But I think in the sort of, in the march to ultimately hold people accountable and call out responsibility on the part of people who are important and in top spots in the government, at the top of which is Donald Trump, I think it's another nail in the coffin of an indictment of his conduct.
Yeah, so I actually have a question about that. Nothing about Donald Trump's response to this crisis has been the slightest bit surprising, right? I mean, we knew he was incapable of empathy. He's shown no empathy. We knew he was self-absorbed. He has been self-absorbed. We know he thinks only about the political consequences to him. That has been on display. And we know he doesn't care about facts or science, and he makes up whatever he needs. And so my question is, to what extent, given how much his reaction has just been exactly what you would have predicted it would be, do you think it actually creates a sense of disgust among people who are not already disgusted? Or are the things that are objectionable about it already priced into their calculations about who he is?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
I'm gonna take a sip of my drink and I'm gonna take a sip of my drink and think about that.
Well, I would love to pivot to another question too. I mean, not to take Ben's question away, unless you want to go, Preet, go ahead.
I'll just answer quickly. Look, I think it depends on how in the cult you are. And I think there are some people for whom, literally, Trump was correct with respect to some people. You could have video of him shooting someone on Fifth Avenue. People would come up with an excuse. They would say that's a deep fake, and they're not going to be deterred no matter what. So it doesn't matter. Then other people who are more on the fence, I think this exposes Trump a lot more, because it's harder to show that you've been expert when 57,000 people, 55,000 people are dead in America, more than any other country, when a few weeks ago he said nothing was going to happen. And then I think there's another category of person, no matter where they were, if they had been personally affected by this and they have had a loss, that changes people's minds about issues in a very, very severe way. They have a friend or a father or a mother or an uncle who they think got bad information from the President of the United States, and not enough precautions were taken. By the way, this is still unfolding. I think there's a lot of room for people to change their minds. Let's see what happens in Texas. Let's see what happens in Georgia and in Florida. There are a lot of people who are doing some wishful thinking about whether or not this is going to go away. And depending on what those outcomes are for people in those communities and a lot of people in red states, depending on how bad those outcomes are, I think there could be significant change, but maybe not.
So you live in the original ground zero of the
The
US.
epicenter.
I mean,
do.
like you're
I
in,
drove past it on my way out of town.
you're in, I mean, what do you live, 5 miles from New Rochelle?
Yeah, very close. Very close.
So what has I mean, to the extent that you've ventured out of your house at all, what has the atmosphere in the local community been like?
So I think it's changed over time. I mean, I've counted now. I'm on day 47 of barely having left my house in Westchester. You know, in the beginning, it was kind of strange. You know, we went and picked up our daughter from college because the semester ended early and she's remote learning still in her freshman year. And, you know, people asked the question, and we kept hearing stories about other colleges where students were on vacation, and the policy was suggested that if people were from Westchester County, they had to quarantine before they came back, or if you're from Westchester, maybe you wouldn't be allowed to come back. So we became familiar very early on with this idea that, like, you know, being the Wuhan of America, based on no testing and based on nothing other than the fact you happen to be from some area where, yeah, it's ground zero, but there weren't a ton of cases back then. And that's very jarring for a community. I think, like other things, Westchester, New York City, who have borne the worst brunt of this nationally in terms of numbers, we're doing a little bit better now. You know, we've leveled off. The number of hospital admissions is going down. People admitted to the ICU is going down. The number of deaths, I think it was 300 something, which is a crazy number to say that that's a positive sign. When weeks ago there was no one dying in America. You know, we feel a little bit, we got a lot more to go, but there's been a lot of community here in this area, in the New York metropolitan area, and we feel we've been effective. We feel we've been smart about it. Maybe we could have locked down earlier. I think those questions are going to need to be asked and answered. But there's a crazy amount of camaraderie. I'll tell you, you know, one thing we did, even though I'm in Westchester, a couple of weeks ago, we drove my family into Manhattan and parked outside of Beth Israel Hospital. We didn't leave our cars. We had masks. We stayed, you know, socially distancing, so we could arrive by 7 p.m., which is the time, as some people know, when people in New York City go out, open their windows and bang on pots to celebrate and thank medical professionals in the city for helping save lives at great risk to themselves. And when you watch that and you see that, you feel a lot better about your own situation. You feel a lot less sorry for yourself because you realize how many people are putting their lives on the line. And that's sort of the spirit of what I think gets people in Westchester and New York City through this.
Yeah, it's a beautiful concept. And I also think that it's like one of the things that, you know, Ada Palmer, who is a Renaissance historian, was on the show yesterday and actually was like kind of tremendously great in kind of contextualizing the pandemic, I think in terms of like history, but also kind of like explaining how significantly different this is. And one of the things is like the amount of information that you have passing between people and like how people can get to certain places and realize that they can be in certain places and applaud certain people and do that type of thing. I think it's amazing.
I forgot to ask Ada about this yesterday, but I heard that the first city, so of course the word quarantine comes from the word for 40 in Italian, which is, you know, the number of days that the Venetians required ships when they would come in to stay before they could dock and come off the ship. And that was a smallpox control measure. But the first city to actually do isolation was Milan. And the way they did it, it's unbelievably brutal. Whenever a house would have a plague in it, they would just brick up the house with the people in it and thereby isolating them, and they would die and they would not be able to
That's awful.
with others. And that was a very effective plague control measure that and is kind of the origins of what we call isolation.
I don't think I'll ever use the trolley problem again after this entire
I hope we're not going to end. I hope we're not ending on
that
note, because I don't have enough vodka.
No,
anymore.
we're not going to end on that note. Thank you.
But here's the bright side of that story, which is I need a double.
Jesus, Ben.
I don't actually know if it was true, if it's true, and I meant to ask Ada about it yesterday and forgot. So I'm throwing this out there as something that may be true about the history of Milan and
if anyone
pandemic
knows,
control
Ada.
members. And if anybody knows the answer to this, please, tweet at us and let us know.
I have a question to end all questions and to end
does it involve bricking in stick people?
I think I wanted to talk about kind of like, we started talking about TV, and I have always, my parents, sorry, Preet, you haven't watched the show before, but my parents are both like state and local judges. Like they're just like, they kind of do this. I grew up with this my whole life. And so like Law and Order, my parents, I'd be watching it obsessively. My parents would just be like, this is bullshit. This is not how it works. This is like garbage. I mean, granted they're from upstate New York, but like, this was kind of like the thing. And I'm just very curious as to like how you feel the depictions of the DA's office or the SDNY or like whatever else in Manhattan are conveyed authentically in television, if they are at all.
And what's the best portrayal of federal law
what's the best
enforcement
portrayal
you've ever seen?
I don't know. Obviously, all of them are not accurate, and I'll disclose that there have been times over the last 3 years that people have approached me and talked about making a series, and so I've talked to a lot of people who want to consult or want to know how they would go about making, a TV program or a movie or a limited series on a streaming service. The show, and in talking to folks and my own observations, I understand. And also being a TV and huge movie fan myself, you have to take some liberties, right? You have to take some, otherwise no one's going to watch. Lots of things that happen in life that are depicted as amazingly interesting in the day-to-day are awfully mundane. Cybercrime is fascinating and interesting, but it's hard to depict that when the crime is occurring at people just typing on their laptop. Trials are often excruciating. I mean, I've participated in a million trials and overseen a million trials. Much of what happens is excruciatingly boring. Putting in phone records, putting in documents.
But I mean, like conferences with judges on Law and Order, for example, are like basically like for dum-dums. It's like reading, like
but I think Law and Order, I think on the scale, on the spectrum, is one of the more accurate ones. The thing that kills me about shows like Law and Order, and you see this in the movies too, is it's always the assistant district attorney is working at their desk and they have a little, lovely lamp and there's no overhead light, more mood lighting. And the defense lawyer on a huge case, unannounced, will walk in and has a folded up motion in his breast pocket and says like, here you go. Here's my motion to suppress. Like, dude, there's a process. Like you can email, there's a filing
and there's
process.
electronic
that's
filing.
not how it works, dude. You can't walk in
but there's
here.
something, but I get that if the main character of the show is the DA or someone very senior, it doesn't do for drama purposes for that person to only be behind a desk. And that's why you end up seeing the United States Attorney or the DA, which never happens in real life, actually be at the scene of the search warrant or the arrest, or I literally in 7.5 years as the leader of the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, I never had occasion at a bar or on the street or at an arrest to have a confrontation with a defendant. Never happened, right?
Do you
Not with
regret
Steve
that?
Cohen or anyone else? I
Do you regret that there was never a moment
Why
where,
wasn't there a
regret
better
that deeply.
watering hole for you, Preet? That was
Where-
like just like the watering
I
hole you
regret that
went with your U.S. attorneys, and you were there, and they knew where to find you.
But I'll make another point
don't you
about
regret that Dinesh D'Souza has never come up to you and say, "Why did you do this to me, Preet?" And you could look him in the eye and say, "Dinesh, you did it to yourself."
You're intent on ending this on a bad note. First with the breaking up
Yeah,
of
why
poor
do you
hapless
like? I'm trying
families
to make this
in
better.
Milan, and then you went worse with Dinesh. Look, so I'll give you an example of something that's sort of interesting, right? If there's ever a show about a particular occupation or industry, whether it's intelligence operatives or FBI agents or judges, or I'm sure news anchors or whatever, there's going to be a huge amount of liberties that are taken to get the drama going and to make the show more interesting. I'll give you an example of people in my office who have often been annoyed by the depictions of the U.S. Attorney's Office, for example, in Billions as being unrealistic. Lots of those people, who, by the way, happen to work with the intelligence community, absolutely love and adore the show Homeland.
I love that show.
Yeah, but Homeland is a much bigger perversion and distortion of what it's like to actually be a CIA officer.
Agent. It's complete bullshit.
Than Billions is. But so you have to, I think, watch these things with a grain of salt.
So here's my challenge to you all is to imagine a show. So I don't know what percentage of the CIA is an analytical operation, but it's, 90 plus, right? Most of the CIA sits there and it's basically a giant think tank using a whole lot of classified information that is collected. Only relatively small components of it are operational or collect information. Most of it processes information. And so I was thinking, like, what would a thriller look like that was about the actual CIA, right? Like a whole bunch of people sitting at desks doing analysis.
No, that's not a fucking thriller, Ben. That is boring shit.
That's a snoozer.
I'll
tell you the other problem, right? When people talk about making shows, I mean, people made mistakes at the SDNY, and not everyone was perfect. But I never met anyone who I thought was a criminal who worked in the U.S. Attorney's Office, or was constitutionally unethical. People make mistakes, and most people try to do good, and we screen them. And they had FBI background checks and everything else. And you talk to people who make TV shows, it's utterly boring to have only good people in a place.
Yes,
you have to have a villain.
Absolutely is.
You have to have a fraudster, right?
I'm so there for you for that. I'm like, yeah, well,
I think
really good people worked for the federal government for a while. Like,
I think it would be a challenge that somebody should step up on. Like, make a do you know, like, yes, you do. Audience, do you know how many people in the FBI are forensic accountants? Like a movie about.
Are you trying to negatively affect recruiting at the FBI?
No, I
don't. Leon Panetta came when he was director of the CIA, and he accepted my invitation to come speak to the troops at my office, informally, off the record, and answered questions. It was a great thing that he did. And people ask questions about recruiting, and is it more easy or more difficult, depending on the timing, to recruit people to the CIA? And he says, you know what? Every time a James Bond film is released, recruiting goes up. So whether it's realistic or not, it moves the numbers a little bit.
On that cheerful note, Preet, go back to put your cape back on. Go back. I will put my
cape back on. Cheers, folks.
As the U.S. Attorney's Office does, flying across the city, using superpowers to stop crime. And we, of course, know you're running a shadow U.S. Attorney's Office out of your house in social distancing, because that happens in real life.
Ben, don't say that.
Let's go back to the bricking up of families in Milano.
Yeah. Don't my Billions questions look really great compared to Ben's questions now, Preet?
No, I think the Preet never really left is the point. He's still the once and future U.S. Attorney of SDNY.
Well, I'm actually really looking forward to him being more than that. So someday, and stop ruining it, Ben.
All right. So
it's a pleasure being with you guys. Be safe. Be safe.
Great to have you.
And thanks for doing this in lieu of fun.
Yeah. So come, join us anytime. Tomorrow, who do we have, Kate?
We have Tomas Ilves, the former president of Estonia.
Yes,
to talk to
and,
us about electronic voting and mail voting. And
and
it's
the
going to be great.
and the one head of state who has endorsed my challenge to Putin for a fist fight. So we're going to, of course, talk about, hand-to-hand combat with Vladimir Putin. And until then, just keep in mind. Oh, what's our sign off today, Kate?
I don't have a sign off today. And
Brick them in is what I say. How's that for us?
Don't brick them in is what I
Don't
say.
brick them in.
Don't brick them in.
Don't brick us in.
I'll see you later.
All right. Remember, until tomorrow, if you can't have fun, in lieu of fun, you can still hang out with Kate and me.
Bye, guys. Thank you, Preet. It was really lovely to meet you.
Take care. Thanks for having me.
Yep.